Ford is one of the biggest car companies in the entire world, valued around $50 billion, and yet the man who created it all came from very humble beginnings. Our story begins in 1863 in Dearborn, Michigan, where William and Mary Ford had a son, Henry. Henry's father owned a farm which Henry was supposed to take over as he was the eldest out of six children. Henry, just like other kids, didn't like going to school, so he dropped out of school in 8th grade and never went again. But unlike other kids, Henry had developed an early interest in mechanics and was quite good with it. His father gave him a pocket watch at the age of 12. After tweaking with its mechanics for multiple times, Henry would be able to dismantle and reassemble the watch in a matter of minutes. And by doing the same with its friends and neighbor watches, he quickly gained the reputation of a watch repairman. But one of the most important events in his life was one of his school trip to Detroit, where he saw a steam engine for the first time in his life. It was there when Henry fell in love with his passion. Over the next few years, Henry continued to work on any machinery he could get his hands on. At the age of 15, he constructed his first steam engine, but at that point he had no idea that his life was about to be ruined. In 1876, Henry's mother Mary died of a sudden illness, leaving young Henry devastated as he shared a deep bond with his mother. Now, with his mother gone, Henry had an opportunity that would later shape his life. See, Henry never liked working on the farm. In fact, he hated it. I never had any particular love for the farm. It was a mother on the farm that I loved. So in 1879, at the age of 16, Henry packed his bags and against the wishes of his father, left his home for Detroit, where he got a job as a machine apprentice at James Flowers and Brothers Machine. He worked there for a while, but in 1882 he decided to return home, back to his father's farm. Henry later married Clara Jane Bryant in 1888. As a wedding gift, his father gave him 40 acres of land. In 1891, Henry returned to Detroit with his wife in a small apartment, this time just to work with the Edison Illuminating Company, which at the time was providing electricity for over 1,000 homes in Detroit. Henry's job was quite simple. The electricity that was being provided was generated by steam engines, and whenever the engines broke or had a problem, Henry, being a skilled mechanic, would just simply fix them. Quickly rising through the ranks, Henry became the chief engineer in just 2 years. And around this time, he also completed his first gas engine. And using this gas engine to create his first motor car is what Henry wanted. But making this dream a reality would take years. Finally, in 1896, after 3 years of constant failure, he managed to make his first horseless carriage. He called it the quadricycle. Henry drove this car about 1,000 miles before selling it for $200 to boost his finance for further projects. He then started his second car around this time, eventually building 3 of them in his own workshop. Around this time, Ford attended a meeting of Edison executives, where he was introduced to another mastermind like him, Thomas Edison. Edison was impressed by Ford's work, and finally feeling confident enough in 1898, he resigned from Edison Company and founded the Detroit Automobile Company in 1899. But Henry's dreams were crushed as his first company failed miserably. There were multiple reasons for the company's failure. Henry's idea for improving the car weren't in line with the stakeholders of the company, who were pressuring him to make passenger cars. But one of the biggest reasons was the part required to make the car were produced by other companies, and whenever the delivery was late, the whole company had no choice but to sit and do nothing. This slowed the production by a significant amount, and the first car, which he called the delivery wagon, took almost 6 months to make, and only 20 of them were produced in the company's first 2 years. As a result, the company was determined to shut down. Now that Henry's first company had failed, he turned his attention to racing cars. At this time, racing was at its peak in America, and Henry saw an opportunity to show his skills and the quality of his cars. A year later, Henry's newly designed racing car defeated the car of Alexander Winton. This new racing car of his got a lot of attraction, and this was the popularity he needed to win the investors' trust once more. As a result, the Ford Motor Company was born, as Henry the chief engineer, but once again Henry's place in the company was in danger. After the birth of the company, Henry focused on making racing cars, which made the investors angry. They wanted him to make passenger cars which they could sell to the public, which of course had a lot of profit margin. So they brought in another Henry, Henry Martin Leyland, to replace Ford. Henry Ford was not happy with this, so he left the company, taking his name with him. But Henry Leyland did as his investors wished and created what we know today as the Cadillac. Henry Ford, on the other hand, turned his attention to racing once again and created the Ford 999, an 80 horsepower car that was driven by Barney Oldfield. This new racing car had broken all the American records driving at maximum speed of 91 miles per hour. Henry Ford was now known as the best American designer for racing cars. Now with this reputation, he knew that he would be backed by investors once again, and this time Henry wouldn't let this opportunity go to waste. With financial support of 11 investors, the Ford Motor Company was reborn, but this time instead of making racing cars or cars for other businesses, Henry decided to make the car more accessible for the common man. You see, at that time, owning a car was luxury not every man could afford. Cars were primarily used for racing or owned by the wealthy. So with this idea in his mind, Henry got to work, but it wasn't this easy. It took him around 20 designs after he finally went with the one he called the Model A. And over the years he kept on improving his designs and creating new ones throughout the alphabet. But what really changed over the years was how the cars were being produced. Henry learned the importance of a reliable supply chain when his first company failed, which is why he tried getting as many parts as possible from the same manufacturer. But the biggest game changer was his lucky visit to a slaughterhouse in Chicago. There he saw the concept of the assembly line, and it was there that Henry Ford had the idea of using the assembly line for his cars. By using this technique, he could possibly produce more cars than ever. See, at that time, all the other car companies, including Ford, put together the cars by hand, so the production was naturally a lot slower. So in 1909, Henry built his factory where he hired 300 employees to experiment with the assembly line. Even though at that time Henry was producing different models at the same time, which meant he couldn't use the assembly line properly, but it did increase the production by a high amount. At this time, Henry also discovered vanadium steel. Vanadium steel was twice as strong compared to normal steel, and it was also light in weight, and this was the change needed for the new automobile era. Henry would use this new steel to make his new best-selling car ever, the Model T, and it was by far the best car Henry had made at the time. And in just a couple of days of release, they got 25,000 orders, even though they couldn't keep up with the demand, producing only 17,000 for the whole year. Henry realized how big of a deal this was, which is why he created a second factory in 1910. There it was when he finally perfected the assembly line in 1913. Between 1910 and 1916, the number of Model T produced were almost a million. At this time in America, half the cars riding on the roads were made by Ford. By the mid-1920s, General Motors was rapidly rising as a leading American manufacturer. Although Henry Ford was against replacing the Model T, he could no longer ignore the facts with Model T sales starting to slide. Ford was forced to relent and approve work on a successor model, shutting down production for 18 months. During this time, Ford constructed a massive new assembly plant at River Road for the new Model A, which was launched in 1927, and later the V8. In 1943, Henry's son Edsel died of cancer. Henry continued running the business for 2 more years before handing the company to his grandson Henry II. But even after retirement, an 83-year-old Henry couldn't fight his illness. In 1947, Henry passed away of cerebral hemorrhage.